prisoners react to the song and how God moves amongst them and speaks to them at that time. So if you got your Bibles handy, we're going to be in a couple different passages this evening. We're going to be in Mark chapter 10, verse 45. We're also going to be in John chapter 13, verses 4 and 5. So you may want to kind of mark both of them and kind of hold your place in one, because we're going to flip between them here in just a few minutes. But before I get to that, I want to talk about dirty diapers, okay? Now, I have to tell you, I love my kids. I love being a dad. Anybody that's around me knows that. I love everything that comes with being a dad. However, there are definitely certain parts of the task, certain tasks and certain parental tasks that I will willingly pass off to my wife. Like, for example, even to this day, when a child is sick and they don't make it to the bathroom, or even if they're in the bathroom, relieving themselves of whatever is in their stomach that doesn't want to stay down any longer, that's Jenny's responsibility, because if I happen to be around it, I'll be leaning my head into the commode, joining in the party. So I just can't handle it. And that's just not one of the parenting tasks I want. Well, I'm not bashful to admit that early on, one big parenting task I struggled with was dirty diapers. Okay. Now, the wet ones, not a problem. Wet diapers, they're a piece of cake. Matter of fact, diapers just kind of absorb it all anyway. I was one of those dads that if it said it was good up to 8 pounds, I thought that meant that a child could have 8 pounds of pee in his diaper. So,
oh my God.
I mean, those were, wet diapers, piece of cake change. It was the poopy diapers that I wanted nothing to do with, okay? There were a lot of times that I would find some convenient reason to not change a poopy diaper until Jenny could do it. Even times where I will admit, times where I would say, "Oh, honey, I didn't even know they were poopy." Yeah, I did. That's why they're across the room. I didn't want to smell them. I will readily admit that was a task I passed off easily and many, many times. But I will even tell you, and Hannah, you won't like this. You may even hit me when you hear this.
Oh my God.
But I was one of those parents who, if his child had pooped as I was putting him in the car to come to preschool,
oh my gosh,
I wouldn't take him in and change them. I would leave him in the car until we got to preschool, and then go into the preschool worker and go, "Here you go, all yours."
I do that. It drives me crazy. Oh my God.
I was one of those despicable parents that handed off poopy kids.
The ones that every daycare teacher hates.
I admit it. I hated changing poopy diapers so much that was me. Now, I'm not proud of that. And I will say over time, I got better. I mean, initially this was with Garrett and Spencer being right close to each other. By the time we got to Meredith, it was a whole different animal, and I was a lot older and a lot more mature.
A whole different animal.
But I will say that initially, I just couldn't get past the grossness of it.
I understand.
Especially, but not limited to, and anybody that's had to change a dirty diaper knows what these are. When a child has a blowout.
Oh, Lord.
When it comes out the top of the diaper and the sides of the diaper, and it's all in their clothes and everywhere else. That's bad stuff, man. Those are times where it's like, how far can I hold you, and who can I give you to? Because I do not want you. I just didn't want to deal with the nasty and the dirty. I just didn't want to deal with the gross. Wet diapers, a lot easier, a lot cleaner. You take them off, wipe everything down, put another one on. And as long as you're quick, you don't get hosed down by your children, life is good. Yeah. Poopy diapers, whole nother story, because it'd be all over the place. And how in the world can something so little make something that smells so bad? I will never figure it out. But
it's not bad till they go on the bottle.
Listen, it's how much they do. Listen, how much they do.
Here's the thing. Sometimes we think Jesus is that way. We think he doesn't want to change our quote unquote poopy diapers. Okay. We think he doesn't want to deal with our gross and our ugly and our dirty and our nasty sins. So we try to hide them. And we try to keep them away from God. We'll let God deal with the quote unquote wet diapers. We'll let God deal with what we consider the cleaner sin. But you see, if he really knew who we were deep down inside, and if he really knew the dirtiness and the grossness and the nasty things, he'd never want to be around us. So we can't even share that with God, and we can't let God be a part of that. Well, tonight I want to share some Bible verses with you and some knowledge with you to let you know that Jesus wants to be around you regardless, that he wants to be a part of your life, no matter what you have going on in it. Mark 10, verse 45, if you're following along. This passage comes at an interesting time in Jesus' life and ministry. The verses leading up to this, James and John are actually arguing over who's greater and who is going to sit next to Jesus when he rules in his kingdom and who's going to have all the power. And they have a quite lengthy discussion and even go to Jesus. Can you just imagine going to Jesus and saying, hey, God, I want to be second in command when you're in the kingdom, But they did. They were very proud and very arrogant and very willing to do that. And the very last thing Jesus says is verse 45. If you look down here with me, he says, for even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus didn't come as a ruler using supreme authority to make people meet his every demand and all his personal desires. Jesus didn't come with a desire to take a little bell and ring it every time he wants somebody to come serve him and wait on him. He didn't want to be catered to by groveling students. He came to serve. He came to touch lives. And then ultimately give his life away as the greatest acts of service as a ransom for all of us. For all us sinners alike. And sometimes I think it's important for us to understand the real in-depth meaning of some of the words in this verse here. The Greek word where it says that to give his life as a ransom for many, the Greek word literally translates into a price paid for freedom from slavery or captivity, being redeemed, being released. It was this concept of being set free. So if you look at it that way, you think Jesus paid a ransom. Jesus gave up his life so that we could be set free from sin. Jesus gave up his life for something that we couldn't pay ourselves. You see, he takes our place. What should happen to us happened to him. His death, his incredible ultimate act of service, gave us all freedom. Freedom from the captivity to addictions in our life, various and assorted forms of addiction, to self-hatred, and to the destructive beliefs that we think are too dark and dirty and nasty for God to deal with. So hold on to that for a moment. Realize that Jesus came to serve you, ultimately by giving up his life, but to serve you nonetheless. And now flip with me over into John chapter 13 for a very powerful story. One of my favorite stories, the story so many times that every time I've read it, I've even tried to put myself in it to think what they must be thinking and what must be going on in it. John chapter 13, verses 4 and 5 says, so he got up from the table. He took off his robe. He wrapped a towel around his waist, and he poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around them. Let me paint this picture for you this evening. The night before Jesus' death, he's gathered the 12 together for a meal. One last lesson before he knows he's going to be arrested and put on trial and ultimately sentenced to death. But before this last lesson, before the meal could begin, something extraordinary happened. Jesus and his disciples, they had come into this banquet room straight off the street. And ordinarily, there would be a host by the door as you entered. And that host would provide a servant at the door. And that servant's had the task of removing each person's sandals and washing their feet. Now, I want you to understand one thing. This task was given to the servant that was the lowest on the food chain, okay? This task was given to the servant that had the lowest amount of respect in the whole house. Yet when they came into this house for dinner that night, there were no servants present. And certainly none of the disciples were going to bow down and wash anybody's feet, because they really kind of felt that was a task that was below them. Jesus, noticing what had happened, gets up from the table and he wraps a towel around his waist and he pours water into a basin. And then he goes to each disciple and he begins to wash their feet. And when I read that, my initial reaction is, Jesus did what? He washed what? You know, I don't know about you, but if I knew I was about to die, my first thought would not be to grab some soap and water and a towel and wash some feet. Feet don't really bother me, but even then, I'm not crazy about washing somebody else's feet. Look someone in the face? Sure. Shake a hand? Gladly. Put an arm around somebody's shoulder? Happy to do so. Give out a hug when somebody really needs it? Not a problem. But wash feet? Nope. Not something I'm volunteering for. I can find a lot of other things I would rather do than wash somebody's nasty feet. Feet smell bad, and they can be gross, and they can be not pleasant to deal with. But you know, I wonder if that's the point of this. If that's why this story appears in the Bible. It's to make us realize that Jesus touched the stinky, gross feet of his disciples. He came from God. All authority was his. All authority had been given to him by his Father. Yet he took off his robe and he picked up a towel and a bucket of water. And he knelt in front of each disciple and cleaned the dirt from in between their toes, cleaned the nasty toe jam out, cleaned the grossness of each disciple's foot. What an incredible model of service. What an amazing servant attitude. Washing the guest's feet was a job for a household servant to carry out when the guest arrived, as I said earlier. A task reserved for the lowliest servant. And yet in this passage, you have the guy who was beside the creator of the universe when it was all made, bowing down to wash his disciples' feet. I can only imagine what had to be going on in the disciples' minds as their master, as their teacher, as their rabbi knelt down and washed their feet. You know, it's also amazing to me that Jesus knew that he'd be betrayed by one of his disciples. He knew that he'd be denied by another, and he knew that all of them would desert him for a time. Yet he still wrapped a towel around his feet, around his waist, and he washed their feet. He still loved them. He still cared about them. You see, the thing is, Jesus knows the sins that we've committed, and he knows the sins that we're going to commit. Let that set in for a second. He knows what we're going to do before we even do it. Yet, in spite of all of that, he wants to serve us and love us the same way that he did the disciples. He wants to clean up every dirty, ugly, gross part of our lives the same way that he cleaned up those nasty, dirty feet that night. The same way that he reached into their lives and showed them how to love and how to be a servant. I want to share a poem with you. And it's written by a lady that probably you've never heard of, but I'll give her credit, Myra Brooks Welch. And it's a unique poem, but it'll make us stop and think a little bit about what I've just shared with you this evening. It's called The Touch of the Master's Hands. It was battered and scarred, and the auctioneer thought it scarcely worth his while to waste much time on the old violin, but he held it up with a smile. What am I bid for this old violin? Who will start the bidding for me? $1, $1. Who will make it $2? $2. Who will make it $3? $3 once, $3 twice, going for $3, but no. From the back of the room, a gray-haired man came forward and picked up the bow. Then, wiping the dust from the old violin and tightening up all the strings, he played a melody, pure and sweet as the angels sing. The music ceased, and the auctioneer, with a voice that was quiet and low, said, "What am I bid for this old violin?" And he held it up with the bow. $1,000. Who will make it $2? $2,000. Who will make it $3? $3,000 once, $3,000 twice, and going and gone, said he. The people cheered, but some of them said, "We do not quite understand. What changes its worth?" Came the reply. The touch of a master's hand. Many a man with life out of tune and battered and scarred with sin is auctioned cheap to a thoughtless crowd, much like the old violin. A mess of pottage, a glass of wine, a game, and he shuffles along. He's going once, he's going twice, he's going and almost gone. But the master comes, and the thoughtless crowd never quite understands the worth of a soul and the change that's wrought by the touch of the master's hand. You see, God can take any life that's battered and scarred by sin, and by his grace turn it around into something that's beautiful and whole again. He constantly makes something out of nothing. I want you to think about the question that's on the screen in front of you there. Do you see how much Jesus cares about you? How much he values you? Think about it for a moment. He cares enough about you. He values you enough to meet you at your level. Enough to touch the dirtiest parts of your life. Enough to clean up the ugliest areas in your life. Enough to die for you. That is a complete and total definition of grace. And an incredible example of unconditional love. Let's pray, guys. Father, I thank you so much for tonight, God. I thank you for a chance that we could gather here and worship you and spend time in your word. Father, I pray that your blessing would just be on us now as we move into a time of discussion on this passage and on the words that have been shared tonight, God, and that your spirit will continue to move. That you help us continue to think about what it means to be served by you and to allow you to reach into the darkest, dirtiest, nastiest parts of our lives and clean them. We love you, God. Amen.